Good morning. Questions and answers of Mother's Day. What fortune does Mrs. Fitzgerald predict for Mrs. Pearson? Mrs. Fitzgerald is quite equivocal in her predictions. She says it could be what? A good fortune or a bad one. All depends on Mrs. Pearson's herself now. She asks her to decide firmly how fortune depends on it. So, what difficulties does Mrs. Pearson face while dealing with the various members of her family? Mrs. Pearson loves her husband and children too much. She does not find enough courage to discuss the problem with them. She only keeps dropping hints. That means she does not openly talk about her feelings. She hates any unpleasantness. She does not want any unpleasant thing to happen in the family. She does not know where to start from. She doesn't know how to begin discussion with the other members of the family. That means what? She's somewhat confused as to what she should do. Yes? Okay. What is Mrs. Pearson's problem? What advice does Mrs. Fitzgerald give her? Mrs. Pearson's problem is that her family takes no notice of her, though she is extremely fond of them. She runs after them all the time, takes their orders as if she was the servant of the house. Yes, that is how the members of her family behave, as if she's the servant, keep ordering her, do this, do that. She stays at home every night while they go out enjoying themselves. Mrs. Fitzgerald advises her husband that she should assert herself as the mistress of the house if she wants them to treat her properly. Yeah, very true. Then let me do it, suggests Mrs. Fitzgerald. How does Mrs. Pearson react to it? Mrs. Fitzgerald offers to deal with the family of Mrs. Pearson and teach them to treat her properly. Mrs. Pearson feels flustered. She thanks her, saying that it won't do at all. They would resent being ill-treated by somebody else and wouldn't listen. How does Mrs. Fitzgerald perform the trick of changing her personality with that of Mrs. Pearson? Mrs. Fitzgerald holds the hands of Mrs. Pearson and asks her to keep quiet and not to think about anything. Then she recites a spell, something magical. After the spell has been spoken, the two women they are relaxed as if the life had been drained out of them. Then both come to life. Now Mrs. Pearson has the personality of Mrs. Fitzgerald and Mrs. Fitzgerald has of Mrs. Pearson. What changes come over to Mrs. Pearson and Mrs. Fitzgerald when they exchange personalities? After Mrs. Fitzgerald tells her spell, she and Mrs. Pearson mutually changed personalities. Now Mrs. Fitzgerald is nervous and confused. On the other hand, Mrs. Pearson is dominating, aggressive and bossy. How does mother make fun of Charlie Spence? Charlie Spence is Doris's boyfriend. She intends to go out with him that evening, but mother makes fun of Charlie Spence. She says that Charlie has buck teeth, that means teeth protruding teeth coming out, and he's half-witted, not intelligent. She wonders why Doris could not find anyone better. Yes, mention 3 things in the behavior of mother that astonish Doris. First, mother has not got tea ready for her as usual. Secondly, mother smoking. Thirdly, she's not in mood to iron her silk that she intends to wear that evening, so that annoys her. Yes, what according to Doris could be the reason for mother's strange behavior? According to Doris, mother has hit her head or something that could have been the cause of her strange behavior. Cyril agrees that his mother's behavior was rather odd, but Doris's idea seems too far-fetched. Why does Doris asked mother whether she had fallen or hit herself with something. How does mother react to it? Okay, let us see. Doris asks mother whether she had fallen or hit herself with something because she's under the impression that mother had gone balmy, somewhat like mad because of some violent shock. Mother becomes aggressive to hear this and asks her to behave properly and stop asking such silly questions. Why is Cyril Pearson astonished at mother's behavior? Why is Cyril Pearson astonished? First, mother has not got tea ready. Secondly, she has got his things ready, though she had not got his things ready, though she had promised in the morning to look through them in case there was any mending, repairing. Obviously, he's astonished at what strange behavior of the mother. Then mother asks him whether there's any stout left in the house. That's a nice way to talk. What would happen if we talk like that? Says Cyril. In what context does he say so? What argument does he get him in return? When Mrs. Pearson tells her son Cyril that she has decided now that she doesn't like mending, that means doing any sort of repairing, Cyril objects to her words. Mrs. Pearson gives him a taste of his own medicine by saying that all of them talk like that. If there's something at home they don't like to do, then don't do it. If it is something at their work, they get the union to bar it. She has now joined the movement. So children, that's all for today. Write down in your notebooks, read again and again. Thank you.